Welcome to the Legally Ever After Real Estate Podcast, where we help you build, protect, and pass on your assets. I'm your host, estate planning attorney, Pamela Moss-Garrett. Let's get started. All right, today we have Chad Johnson from Johnson Law. He is going to be talking to us about real estate and construction tips. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you, Pam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here. So let's dive in. A lot of our clients are real estate investors, and our audience is real estate investors who come across these construction real estate issues that involve litigation, and they don't know how to protect themselves. They don't know their rights. What would you say to get them started?
Yeah, especially with markets changing like they are now, I think the most important thing to do would be to manage risk. There's a lot of different ways that you can manage risk. Most of it takes stuff on the front end, which is good, rather than actually being in litigation and paying lawyers to be a part of that, because that can be a much more expensive process. If you do a little bit of more planning on the front end, you can certainly save yourself a lot of money in the back end. So, one thing that a lot of people don't know, frankly, my firm, the lawyers at my firm, have both defended and sued a lot of real estate investors. They don't realize that they have potential liability if they're either doing, even minor fixes and flips, they're holding and then selling, 5-10 years later, things like that. So to really manage that risk, you should really work on the front end with some contracts. That would be the biggest one. There are different types of contracts that, depending on the situation. One, I've seen a lot of situations where, people buy a property with a family member, a friend, a business partner, and they don't have a formal agreement amongst each other. And that leads to a lot of problems.
Okay, so kind of managing the risk. And one way to, before we kind of get into litigation, starting off on the pre-litigation, how to avoid being in litigation.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of said managing risk. And one way is with contracts. And so you said, one way to manage risks is between business partners. So if you're going in to some type of investment with another investor, making sure you have a really good contract. And when you say a good contract that manages risks, what are some tips around that? What are things that they should be thinking about? What are the horror stories that you've seen on both sides that they should be aware of?
Yeah, just on the side amongst business partners, a lot of times they say, okay, well, I got a friend or a business partner or a cousin that does the construction side. I'm the marketing person and I'm the real estate agent, or however that partnership develops, but they don't ever formalize things in writing. And that causes a problem for a lot of reasons. One, people forget or they misremember in their favor very often, and that leads to hurt feelings and litigation. So depending on how you're acquiring real estate, whether you're in an LLC or you're working for your own companies and do some sort of joint venture agreement, I really highly recommend you reach out to an attorney that could help you draft up the right documents. They can be pretty simple, but you might want to have different ones on every project, depending on how you're taking title and how the partners are coming together for that project.
Okay, great. And then, so the risk that I'm hearing from you is disputes. Maybe the deal goes south in some way. Maybe things don't end up how people want it to end up. Mm-hmm. Or maybe things go great and someone's a little bit greedy, and that handshake deal is what you're saying kind of isn't really kept down the road. And then you mentioned another thing like fix and flips. People don't understand. So we talked about the liability between you and other people that you're working with. Mm-hmm. And then there's the liability of you and outside third parties, people that you're not in business with, you're not doing it with. And what is the kind of managing the risk there? Is it contracts? Is it other insurance, obviously? What other tools?
Yeah, those are two great things. I'll start with contracts. Again, you're going to want to have clear contracts written by construction or real estate lawyer. And they can be very simple. I've had some people that are saying, hey, I work with people on a cash basis. I just need something very simple, some terms and conditions that I can add to protect myself so that, if the worst types of things happen, and we've seen it all, it more protects them. For example, contractors take the deposit and they run. And, you might be surprised to find out that in America, even if someone steals your money, you're not automatically guaranteed attorney fees for seeking that money back, even if it's just so simple. So, those are the types of things that we would write into a contract that says, hey, if there is any litigation that, our client would get their attorney fees paid by the other side. That's one way you can help manage that risk so that, even if you do have to hire an attorney, you maybe not be out as much or all of that money for attorney fees. So that's one type of thing. Just to have clear direction, who's pulling permits amongst them. Sometimes it's the homeowner, the title property owner, sometimes it's the contractor. Having that stuff clear is going to help avoid disputes down the road. Having clear payment terms of hitting certain milestones and things like that. I mean, I could sit here and talk on this podcast for hours of the horrible stories of very good real estate investors that just came across the wrong contractor or the wrong contractor at the wrong time that decided they were going to really mess with their the investor's investment of the real estate. And it's terrible. And so a little bit of, what you might spend a couple $1,000s to get these contracts set up for you, you may be able to reuse them a lot, can help save tens or even hundreds of thousands on the back end. So I highly recommend it.
So I know when you mentioned that, I feel like I've referred to you because I do get a lot of calls from people who are in that situation where they're working with a contractor and the contractor doesn't do a good job, or the contractor disappears, or especially during kind of everything with the aftermath of the pandemic and supply chain, things aren't meeting those deadlines. And so having a clear contract, you were mentioning with, those attorneys' fees can take care of that and mitigate some of that, because then at least you're not in a situation where you're going to throw good money after bad, right?
Right.
Are there other things from vetting contractors that you would say, besides, making sure the contract is strong, that helps kind of avoid those types of mistakes?
Yeah. And this is something I'd also put in the contracts, but on the vetting side, making sure that they're appropriately licensed and insured. And that's a pretty long conversation on appropriately insured or licensed for the work they're doing. But, in a most basic sense, do they have a contractor's license in the jurisdiction that you're actually doing work in? Some people are like, well, I have my Denver license. Well, you're doing work in Arvada. You need to have an Arvada license for that to be legal, for you to obtain the right permits, things like that. And so that will take some vetting on the front end. It might take some uncomfortable conversations with the people you work with, but it is very important. And then on the insurance side, you want to make sure that your contractors have insurance for those things that, you discussed, of if there are problems with the work. You may notice them now and you want to have something in your contract, or at least as a backup, make sure the contractor has insurance so you can get them addressed. Or, in another scenario, you actually don't notice them, you sell the home, the homeowner notices them, and they're really mad. And so having that insurance out there for the contractor is important. You can also build in great things in your contract where they buy insurance for you, which is very important as well. Which kind of brings me to the next thing that you really should be doing is buying your own insurance in case that contractor buys insurance and then cancels it the next day on you and doesn't tell you, things like that. Seen stuff like that, and it's pretty bad.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
When you're talking about buying insurance, obviously there's a lot of nuances to that, but what are some tips or common mistakes that you've seen where investors should really be careful?
The biggest one is just not obtaining it. That is a big problem. They think, well, my contractor has insurance and I'm just an investor. And that is all well and good. You may just be an investor, but under Colorado laws, if you're making any decisions on what is getting fixed and what is not getting fixed, then you are more of a developer, and you can be held liable for either negligence or non-disclosure in making those types of decisions. And you just want to protect yourself. The nice thing about like commercial general liability insurance is probably, one of the most important insurances you can buy in this situation, is that it's not just to pay out settlements if there's a legit claim. If you have a homeowner that is unreasonable, it will protect you in that situation too, because they actually hire you a lawyer. And I know, Pam, you used to do this a long time ago and be one of those lawyers, and so did I, that came in and helped defend. And some of those homeowners are, not right. But do you really want to spend, $50,000, $100,000 of your own money to defend that type of thing? Or would you rather spend, $5,000 to $10,000 a year in this type of insurance that can really protect you and not only pay for any settlements if something really is wrong, but also to hire you a competent lawyer, hire you great experts and things like that to help defend that type of case when it has no merit.
That's super helpful. And you mentioned before with kind of fix and flips and people moving properties really quickly. Can you get insurance that will cover you on multiple properties? How do you recommend the cadence of that?
Yeah, commercial general liability insurance basically works as it will cover almost all properties that you're working on, as long as the damage occurs during that policy year. And it's a kind of a complicated analysis, but you really should be buying it every year. And it's a big expense. I get that. But if you are doing fix and flips beyond just changing carpet and things like that, I really highly recommend it for that reason. And because it will cover multiple projects. You can buy some project specific policies. If you are, developing, for example, a duplex, a sixplex, or something larger, that makes sometimes more sense to have a project specific policy, but it typically covers you multiple years. And you want to carry that as you continue to grow your business and your investment portfolio of fix and flips. Other types of insurance, while the construction is going, make sure you have a builder's risk policy. And then certainly if you are going to hold the properties as either a landlord or some sort of short-term rental situation, make sure you have the appropriate homeowner's insurance with the, landlord and or short-term rental type of addendums and certificates on those.
Great. Is there a certain kind of rule of thumb as far as how much coverage you should have based on, the size of the project or the dollar amounts involved? Is it like a 2 times or 3 times or any type of guidance there on numbers?
You should really, if you are doing, a lot of real estate investment, a lot of fix and flips, develop a good relationship with a knowledgeable insurance broker. I think you've had at least one on the podcast here that I reached out to get some rough quotes on stuff and things like that. And because it isn't really a rule of thumb, I think you really should develop that relationship with someone that knows what they're doing to help you through that process. A lot of policies are kind of standard, but that standard doesn't maybe fit you. And if anything, it costs, a few dollars to be overinsured, but to be underinsured can be a real big problem, especially if you do develop a triplex, for example, and all 3 make claims, and it can be a big problem.
Super helpful. So on the managing risk component, before we kind of go into the litigation component, any other tips that our listeners should be aware of?
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people don't know about too is another form of contract when you go to sell these properties at some point and get out all your equity that you've built through time or sweats or however it may be. Disclosure obligations. A lot of people go to these fix and flip or other type of real estate investor seminars, and they say, hey, you just incorporate your business in Nevada, you do this, it's all magic, you never have any problems. And I can say, as the person that is usually representing homeowners when they have these types of problems, that we do investigate these types of claims, and we've had a lot of homeowners come back after fix and flippers investors in this situation. The biggest thing that people don't do is they don't pass along all reports that they had regarding the property. I can tell you horror story. Well, depending on what side of you are, different types of perspectives on people find reports, in the junk drawer or in a storage box in the garage, and they say, "Oh, this retaining wall was failing," or, "We had this fire damage that has been all repaired, but wasn't disclosed as a part of the process," or prior things that got covered up in the course of home ownership, that a homeowner that's buying the home now is mad about because they're saying, well, they didn't disclose this. So make sure you disclose all reports, even the homeowner's inspection report that you got when you bought this home. It might not be relevant anymore. Just disclose it as a part of this process. There is definitely nothing wrong with over disclosure. There's certainly something wrong and even illegal about under disclosure. If you get 3 bids for something and you pick the lowest bid, I would still recommend disclosing all bids in that process, because if you don't, and somehow they find out, they are going to be mad and say, well, you went with the cheapest. And that might not be a problem legally, but if there was a different scope of repair that was maybe recommended by one of those bids, we've seen that happen before, and that can lead to some legal liability for sure.
I super appreciate that you brought up the seminars and this idea of go set up your Wyoming or Nevada entity privately and everything's all fine and dandy and you're fine. And I have so many people that come to me trying to set up those thinking that that's going to avoid litigation, and it simply doesn't. We still investigate. It may delay certain things, but once you get into litigation, you're going to have to disclose certain things. You're still on the hook. And so it gives that false sense of security, which is what I really don't like about those types of seminars. So
Right.
Thank you for kind of sharing that from your perspective, both on the plaintiffs and on the defense side. From the managing risk, before we kind of go into some of the litigation stuff, any other components on the managing risk?
No, I think that's about it. Something people don't know about the homeowners type and landlord type policies is that they also cover you if someone's walking by and slips and falls, the mailman, the guest of the tenants, things like that. So in order to protect your assets, and I know Pam's the expert at this, but in order to protect that, make sure that you have that type of insurance in place too, to protect yourself.
Absolutely. When it comes to litigation, when first of all, from the kind of the plaintiff side, you've been wronged. What are some tips that you have around that side? Whether you have purchased a property and you now find something's wrong, or you've moved in, something like that. Obviously, you're typically going to purchase it, but any tips on that end?
Yeah. The first one would be hopefully to do your best to avoid buying a home with defects. And, it happens. It happens to construction defect lawyers. It happens to engineers and architects. Everyone buys defective. It happens to developers. Everyone buys defective homes, but to try to avoid it at the outset, I would recommend hiring a forensic engineer or architect to help review the home with you. And the reason is this: home inspectors in Colorado, they serve a purpose. They are not licensed by the state of Colorado. So Pam, you and I tomorrow could open up a home inspection company and take people's $300, $500 and say, yep, everything looks fine, or, oh, this and that. And there's a lot of things that they write in to try to cover, their liability in that situation. So bring out someone with a little bit more expertise, someone that knows building codes, someone that'll go do a little bit more in-depth look, someone that'll review prior engineering reports, especially if you're buying a home that's been built in the last 8-10 years, something like that. Have someone else look at it. If it's a 30-year-old home, maybe your home inspector is going to work because, at 30 years, like my home, most of the problems have kind of worked themselves and either shown or they're probably not going to show the major stuff like foundation and slab movement, things like that. So that is one thing that you can do on the front end to hopefully avoid buying a defective home.
From for someone listening who wants to hire a forensic engineer or architect, where do they find good forensic engineers and architects for this type of inspection?
You can either Google it, or if anyone was, listening, ever wants a couple names, I'd be happy to send a few out there. I don't know if Pam still kept her Rolodex for when she did similar work, but I know a couple people that would be great. And if I was looking to buy a home as an investment or otherwise, that's who I would walk the home with.
Yeah. So I think from our perspective, from the litigation perspective, we come across these people, we know who's good, who's not good. But I would imagine people just Googling it, trying to find it, or people in the litigation field might not. So yeah, Chad's office or my office would be a good resource to find those people. All right, great. What else?
Well, then I guess, you can kind of think if the bad thing actually happens and you buy this home, either as an investment or for yourself, and you do have problems. Obviously the first thing I'm going to say is, try to get a handle on what it is. I mean, you don't need to call a construction defect lawyer because you see, a punch list item or something like that wasn't completed in your new build. But, if you start to see cracks in the walls, the doors or windows are sticking, those are really signs of foundation movement or slab movement, or they could be signs of that, which are catastrophic to most homes in Colorado. And it's a big thing here. If you're not from Colorado and you haven't heard, or you otherwise haven't heard about how we have very shifting soils here, it is a big deal. It is what keeps our lawyers always busy, is that, there are, thousands of homes every year in Colorado that have shifting soils, huge damage. And sometimes it costs more than the home's worth to fix that type of home. So be sure, if you're buying a home that's under 8 years and you do start to see signs of that or major water intrusion or other major defects, you talk to a defect lawyer right away.
All right, great. And then So say you buy a new development and they give you that soils report that kind of puts you on notice that you have shifting soils, but you don't understand what that means or you don't request it. Have you waived any type of rights to bring a claim later, or do you still have the rights?
That's a great question. Some of my smartest clients, doctors, lawyers, they look through their contract and they go, I don't think I have a claim here, because they look through this 50-page builder contract, which is written by their lawyers, and they think that all I can do is I waived all my claims when I signed the piece of paper for buying my home. This is why you should talk to an experienced construction defect lawyer, because most of that stuff is not enforceable. Even though it's written in black and white in the contract, there are laws that protect homeowners in Colorado. And so, you might have been given the soils report, but that doesn't mean that you made the decision to use the cheaper foundation. That was a developer or builder along the line that made that risky decision for you, and they can be held accountable for that.
I think one of the things that was really shocking to me when I did construction defect litigation was really, really reputable large development projects that had major construction defect issues. And I think if I was just an average consumer, I'd look at, hey, this is a big corporation. They've been very successful. They have that really nice sales team that is really qualified, and the rates are good. And I would be like, okay, I'm good to go. But then when I got into construction defect litigation, I was so shocked by how horrible it is for consumers and investors who end up with these really bad properties. And so we've been talking about kind of preventative and getting the right people in there, being wary, getting that information. And then when you get stuck in a situation, how well are these claims going now? I know there's been a lot of changes in the laws since I've practiced construction defect law, so I haven't kept up to date. But as an investor who's planning to invest in different properties, should they just completely avoid new construction because of everything we're talking about? What are the trends you're seeing?
I don't think it's something you have to avoid. I think it's something you have to be more wary with newer construction. I mean, really, a lot of people buy new construction going, I just don't ever want to deal with anything. And that's actually the opposite of maybe what you should be thinking, because when a brand new home or development is built, that's when you're going to find the most problems right away. And usually reasonable builders will help you through it through the warranty or punch list process, or otherwise work through it with you. But as you mentioned, even the biggest and the most well-known builders, they consider this a cost of doing business, is, litigating cases with homeowners, even ones that have merit, even ones that are really strong. I've had cases where the homes collapse and they still fight us for years. It's unfortunate. You're right. On the consumer side, it is really unfortunate. But thankfully, we have a system in place and a great track record and a lot of very happy clients. And there are other good construction defect lawyers out there that are doing good things. If I have one recommendation for anyone that is experiencing anything that might be a construction defect in their investment property or private property, when you look to vet these types of attorneys, there are 98% of construction defect lawyers work for the builders and the insurance companies for the builders and the subcontractors and the engineers and the architects, all that. There's only a very small percentage that work for the homeowners, commercial property owners, homeowners associations. And so do your research, ask them their percentage of what they're doing for, property owner side versus defense, things like that, because it does make a big difference.
That's super helpful. Is there anything else when people are looking to hire a construction defect attorney, either on the plaintiffs or the defense side? Either they have a claim that they think, or someone's bringing a claim against them that they don't think is valid. You mentioned, look at kind of the track record, who they tend to represent. Is there any other things that people should be looking for?
Talk to other lawyers. If you're listening to this podcast right now, you probably in some way know Pam, the other lawyers at her firm. And I think her policy is a lot like mine, where it's, someone today, one of my current clients asked me for an employment lawyer recommendation. And I don't do employment law. I don't know the first thing. I would screw up that case, but I know the people that are good in that. And so find a lawyer that you trust, ask them who really specializes in that type of law, whatever it be, whether it be construction defect or anything else. I highly believe in specialization in the law, and there are a lot of very good attorneys out there that can do a lot of things well. I'm not one of those attorneys. I do, very few things very well, and that's what I think is the most advantageous for looking for a construction defect lawyer, looking for someone to do wills, trusts, things like that. I highly believe in specialization in the law, and I think it makes sense if you're going to invest that type of money into a lawyer, that it's someone that's what they do.
Yeah, well, I'm super grateful for you and your team, Chad, because I know for all my clients who reach out to us who have these types of claims or are interested in protecting themselves and doing the right thing, I always recommend your firm. And I've always had nothing but glowing reviews from everyone that's worked with you. So thank you for the great work you're doing in the community. What's the best way for people to reach out to you if they have questions, if this was something that seems like something they need, does your firm handle both the contract side and the litigation side? And what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, we do both. Sometimes, we have people that need contracts like this, and then we'll refer it out to our network of people that are also good at this type of thing. Best way to find us on the web is www.chadjohnsonlaw.com. Look that up. If you have questions, maybe something on our website can help you through that, or just give us a call, 303-586-4829. We do free initial consultations. I say they're an hour. They sometimes end up being much longer, depending on the situation. And, even if we're not the best law firm for you, we will try to find you someone like Law Mother, if it's, wills and estates. If it's something else, we have a great network of attorneys that we can work with and get you the right person.
That's super helpful, Chad, and I'll include all that in the show notes. Before we go to our final question, is there any other final tips you want to share with our audience?
I do have one little pet peeve, and I think it would resonate real well with the investors. If you're buying any multifamily these days, especially in Denver, there has been a real increase in the amount of party wall agreements versus HOAs. And you buying this as an investment, especially if you're buying condo, townhome, duplex, whatever it may be, might not think much of it. Or you might think, hey, great, no HOA. I've seen a lot of real estate agents that have been advertising properties like that, like no HOA. That's great. And there are some definite advantages to not having an HOA. I mean, HOAs are expensive. I just paid my dues a few moments before this podcast. There's politics. There's always, a lot of complaining going around and things like that. A lot of reasons to avoid HOAs. But in the situation where there is property damage, construction defects, or other types of repairs, these party wall agreements, it's a lot harder to get money and to get votes from all your neighbors to do repairs, things like that, without an HOA, because the HOA is taking those dues in to fund those types of repairs. These party wall agreements, they're not typically asking everyone for money every month. So I had a situation where, I represented development and they had big construction defects and we got them the money. But even at that point, when we give them this, these big checks, there's still a lot of management that needs to go on. And a party wall agreement typically won't cover that. Or in another scenario, a drunk driver came in and took out their fence. Well, now all the people needed to vote on whether or not to fix the fence that the drunk driver took out. And, they just couldn't get people to respond because most people didn't care because they didn't even see that fence because their building was on their side. So something definitely consider when you are buying a multifamily type property is whether it's in an HOA versus a party wall agreement. Pros and cons to both, no doubt. But in my experience lately, especially in Denver, a lot of party wall agreements causing a lot of new problems.
For those who haven't come across party wall agreements, it sounds like this is an alternative to an HOA. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So it typically just says, hey, if there's, something that needs to get improved, repaired, whatever it may be, we'll vote on it and then we'll all fund it to repairs. And, there's other parts of the agreement too, where they talk about, if unit 301 leaves their water on and it damages 201, how that gets taken care of and things like that. But for the most part, it takes the management out of the hand of an HOA board or a management company and just kind of puts it loosely out there to all the homeowners that buy into this community. And it's just, homeowners have other things to do. They have jobs, they have families, and they are not always as responsive as an HOA would be to these situations. So you're right. It's a different form of an agreement amongst you all instead of an HOA or a metro district, which is very similar to an HOA. It's just kind of a more loosely based private contract where everyone agrees to something, but it's just in actuality, the practical aspect of the party wall agreement makes it very difficult to execute on anything.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. And so what the takeaway I'm hearing is people are advertising the lack of an HOA on these multifamily as a good thing, but really, especially when it comes to improvements and your types of risks around construction defects and all of those types of things, it sounds like it becomes more of a long-term hassle that can potentially cost a lot more money down the road.
Definitely. And, you might even have the money to make repairs, but you can't get your neighbors to vote for them not because they wouldn't want to do those types of repairs or improvements. It's just because it's just hard to get people to do that. And so, yeah, I think it's a potential problem, but also, like I said, pros and cons on both sides of that coin.
That's super helpful. Well, my final question for you, Chad, that I ask everyone is, what is your legacy? What is the legacy you're building?
Definitely still in progress. The legacy that I'm building is hopefully something that I can pass on to my kids. As an entrepreneur and working in law firms, I've been able to put some money aside and do some investment on the real estate side as well. And so I looked for the financial future of my family. And the same thing with our Johnson Law employees and things like that, allow them to, be able to care for their families, things like that. On the other side, it is helping Colorado homeowners and investors and other property owners, because in certain situations, construction defects or other types of litigation involving construction and real estate can bankrupt people. I've seen it happen. And because they didn't get to a lawyer fast enough or for other reasons. And I, really take pride in that. I know that Johnson Law and Johnson Law attorneys have, turned around the financial futures of hundreds, if not thousands of individuals in Colorado. And that's something we're real proud of.
That's an incredible legacy. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, Chad.
Thank you so much for having me, Pam.
If you need an updated will, trust, or estate plan, and you are a Colorado resident, we would love to be your estate planning law firm. Give us a call at 720-706-0036 to schedule your complimentary 15-minute call. You can also directly schedule at lawmother.com/go. If you liked this episode and you want to learn more, you should definitely check out my international best-selling book, Legally Ever After. It's available on Amazon as both an ebook, a paperback, and an audio version. And if you'd like a free chapter, head over to lawmother.com/LEA.